Hi, I'm Josie Jaffrey. I'm an author of paranormal romance and young adult novels. My latest series is called the Sovereign series, and the first book in the series was out earlier this year in June. It's called the Gilded King, and this is it. In this video, I'd like to read you a very short excerpt from the Gilded King. The Sovereign series is a sequel to my paranormal romance series, the Solus Invicti series. But it takes place about 500 years into the future and it stands on its own. It's aimed at a younger audience and it doesn't presuppose that the reader will have any knowledge of the Solus Invicti series when they read it. The story follows two main characters, one of whom is Julia, who is a teenage human girl, and the other of whom is Cameron, who is definitely not human. So Cameron is part of a vampiric race called the Nobles, who run the city in which Julia is living. The city is called the Blue, and it's surrounded on all sides by forests that are called the Red. And the humans are not allowed to go into the forest because beyond the walls of the Blue is contamination. And they believe that if they take a step into the tree line, then their blood will become contaminated and they will die. So the extract that I would like to read you comes from fairly close to the beginning of the novel. Julia has been assigned to a noble called Lucas as his feeder, so she is required to give him her blood. But Lucas is a little bit different from the other nobles. He isn't keen to take it from her, and he seems to Julia to be a bit strange. He has taken her to the temple in the Blue in the middle of the night and has told her that he wants to show her something, to give her some insight into the history of the settlement in the Blue and to give her some insight into the fairy tales that are behind its founding and behind the way that the nobles live their lives. So this is the extract that I'd like to read to you. He finally released Julia's hand and pushed open the doors to the inner temple. They were smaller than the doors that led from the atrium to the square, and Julia could pick out ornate carvings across their surface as light started to leak through from the hundreds of lamps that lit the sanctum. It dazzled her. The surfaces that weren't covered with gold were faced in white marble so translucent that the light seemed to shimmer inside it. The effect was made all the more striking for the fact that the entire gaping space was completely empty except for the columns that trooped down its sides and a few rows of pews. No, Julia realised, not completely empty. At the very furthest point of the temple, at the end of the double row of pillars that processed towards it, there was a pedestal mounted on a stepped dais. A figure was laid out on top of it. For a moment Julia froze, thinking it was a real person lying there, slumbering in the temple. But something didn't fit. The figure wasn't breathing. It wasn't moving at all. "Come on," Lucas said, leading her down the aisle towards it. "Is it a statue?" she asked. "A tomb, really." As they walked, he snuffed out the lamps that lined the walls until finally the only illumination came from the rounded alcove into which the dais rose. It was a bright island in the centre of the darkness, and in the middle of it the statue shone. A man wearing fine clothing in an unfamiliar style, with a blanket of stone covering his body. His exposed skin was tinged with a sheen of gold that glowed like the walls of the temple. "He looks so real," she said, reaching out to touch the golden curls that crowned his head. They were slick under her fingers, so intricate that they might have been moulded from a real person. "They say he was." "You mean this is his coffin?" The pedestal certainly looked like a tomb. It was wide and deep enough to accommodate a body. "No," Lucas said. "I mean that this is him, that this statue was once alive." Julia's hand had been tracing the lines of his face, but now she snatched it away. "You're not serious." "I am." "This is why you brought me here," she said. "Of course. You want to hear the fairy tale, don't you?" The smile he gave her was mischievous, teasing her into playing along. "All right," she said, returning his smile with a tentative one of her own. "Do you remember what I told you about the silver in our eyes?" His company felt so easy that she might forget he wasn't human, but she could see the silver in the lamplight glinting at her from the other side of the pedestal. "Yes," she said. "Well, there's a reason we hide it, and there's a story that goes along with it." His story? Julia asked, nodding towards the figure stretched out between them. His story, but not just his story. It's a proper fairy tale, so there's a girl too, and it doesn't have a happy ending. Go on. And no one can know I told you this, not even Claudia. All right. He fixed her with his dark eyes. You promise? If you keep building it up, then I'm just going to be disappointed. Promise. Fine, I promise. He smiled again, his eyes twinkling with the anticipation of confidences to be shared. Something happens when we fall in love, he said. Julia swallowed, then worried that he might have heard the sound. The corner of his mouth twitched. Damn. It doesn't happen often, he went on. It's not something they really talk about, but when the nobles fall in love, something changes in their eyes. This silver, he said, pointing to the whites of his own eyes, bleeds into the iris, leaving metallic lines in the colour, sort of bleeding in towards the pupil, circling it in the middle. They call it silvering. You've seen it? Julia asked. Only once. The nobles don't exactly show it off. Now, do you want to hear the story or not? Julia shut up. So, he continued, back when we didn't hide our eyes, our emotions were literally written in them for anyone to see. And that was a dangerous thing, because when one of us silvers, it forms a life bond with the person we silver for. If they were to die, we'd die too. Now, normally that wouldn't be a problem. Normally, if a noble does silver, and it's pretty damn rare, by the way, then they silver for another noble, which doesn't present much of a threat because we're hard to kill. But when a noble silvers for a human, that's a different matter. Suddenly they're vulnerable. They're weak, because all a rival has to do is kill the human the noble loves, and the noble will die too. Is that true? Julia interrupted. Or is this part of the fairy tale? Lucas shrugged. Maybe. If it's happened in my lifetime, then I don't know about it. It sounds made up to me. You don't believe in magic, then? Of course, she said. But just because I believe in one kind of magic, it doesn't mean I have to believe in them all. So that's the end of the extract I'd like to read you. It's just a little teaser for the fairy tale behind the foundation of the blue. Thank you very much for watching, and if you'd like to read more, then the books are available at all good online retailers.